Sometimes at a wedding you'll hear that love is patient and kind. It doesn't envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. What is sometimes read is the beginning, which is, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, which is a reference to disunity over the favorite preacher in the Corinthian church. Verse 2, if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have not love, I am nothing, which is a reference to arguments about hierarchy with respect to the ability to speak truth and understand some of the more challenging parts of the gospel and theology. And he says in verse 3, if I give away all I have and I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Talking about how some who are more able to serve are actually harming the unity of the church. He closes this way, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. He encourages them to grow up. Corinthians is an absolutely fantastic book, and every time I hear someone read 1 Corinthians 13 at a wedding, it reminds me of when I hear every breath you take on the dance floor of a wedding reception, which is odd because that's a stalker song. In the same way that 1 Corinthians 13 is a beautiful exhortation in the midst of a not very beautiful letter against all the things that create disunity. The first division that they talk about is over their favorite preacher, some of whom could produce erudite sermons about the locution through or not about looks. I'm not that one. Erudite sermons take them through the philosophical miasma of the eschaton. And some people liked that kind of preaching, and others did not, and it was creating disunity. Paul pushes them again and again towards humility and even towards those who teach with a level of humility. And this all sounds regular Bible to you. And then chapter 5 says this, it is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you of a kind that is not tolerated even among pagans. And then he says, and if that man and the woman he's with won't repent, kick him out of the church. And this is a little bit why 1 Corinthians 13, read out of the context of 1 Corinthians 5 and 7, is not used well. Then Paul points out that these people are suing one another, and do not picture a church larger than 250. In fact, picture a church of about 30. And remember that a significant part of our evangelism and witness is how we treat one another. The first part of chapter 6 is devoted to don't sue your brother until you exhaust every spiritual solution to this. Paul talks about being a married Christian and acting like a Christian within marriage, being a single Christian and acting like a Christian when single. He talks about guarding one another's consciences as it related to other religions and how they practiced and ate in the area. That still applies to us today. Think masks. Paul gives an incredible diatribe about the importance of fleeing idolatry, where he talks about what it cost the nation of Israel when they were coming out of the land of Egypt, and how when we don't flee idolatry, which is worshiping the things of the world, it is a spiritual death. He talks about the Lord's Supper, different gifts that the Spirit gives, modesty in worship, prophecy and tongues and orderly worship, and the importance of the resurrection. One of my very favorite passages in Corinthians is when Paul says, first to the 3 and then to the 12 and then to 500, though some of them have died, and then to one untimely born, meaning himself. And I always wonder what he means by some. Does he mean like 10 or does he mean like 60? But either way, when he wrote this, there were over 400 people who would say, I met the risen Christ. And all this should encourage us, even though it is a not so great with respect to circumstances letter. It's an incredible letter in terms of what it instructs us, so that at the end, when we have received from Christ, received the way of love, we're able to hear this benediction. Be watchful. Stand firm in the faith. Be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. It's verse 13 of chapter 16. Or from the end of chapter 15, therefore, my beloved, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. Your worship of God, your spiritual community, your efforts with your neighbors and at your place of work are not in vain because of the Lord. 1 Corinthians is a wild ride, but it ends in a beautiful place, reminding us the stability given to us by the Lord, that we might abound in our steadfast work of the Lord where we find ourselves.